I still remember standing at the altar, waiting for my parents to walk through the church doors. My heart pounded with hope, but they never came. While I was holding on to the happiest day of my life, they were across town showering my sister with everything I had begged for. The betrayal sliced deeper than any wound I'd ever known. They didn't just skip my wedding, they erased me, as if my love, my life, my happiness meant nothing. That day, I swore their secret favoritism wouldn't go unpunished. CTA, 15 words. Stay with me, because the truth I uncovered left scars my parents never saw coming. Chapter 1, 400 words. My name is Clara Mitchell. I'm 28 years old and I live in Manchester, UK. For as long as I can remember, my parents, Helen and David, treated my younger sister, Emily, as though she was a diamond, while I was just the stone that held her shine. Growing up, Emily got the newest clothes, the expensive lessons, the constant praise. I, on the other hand, learned early to survive on scraps of attention. But I thought things would change on my wedding day. I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally see me as worthy. I was marrying James Turner, a man I had loved for 5 years, someone kind, hardworking, and loyal. We planned a modest wedding in a small countryside church, nothing lavish, nothing greedy. I wanted them there not for money, but for love. On the morning of my wedding, I stood by the window in my ivory gown, watching cars arrive. My bridesmaids whispered about how beautiful everything looked, but all I could do was wait for my parents' car to turn into the driveway. It never did. I tried to stay calm, telling myself they might be late. But when my cousin rushed in, her face pale, I knew something was wrong. "Clara," she said quietly, "I think you should sit down." She told me that my parents had gone to Emily's engagement party on the exact same day as my wedding. Not only that, but they had poured thousands into making it extravagant, designer dresses, a 5-star hotel, a live band. They had chosen her over me. Again. As I stood there, veil in hand, I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just humiliation, it was abandonment. My parents had made their choice, loud and clear. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Because this wasn't just about my wedding anymore. This was about every time they had belittled me, every time they pushed me aside. And now, I knew one thing with burning certainty. The weeks after my wedding were supposed to be filled with joy, laughter, and memories I could cherish for a lifetime. Instead, they were filled with silence. My parents, who had chosen not to attend, did not call, did not send a gift, not even a single message of goodwill. It was as if my marriage had erased me from their lives entirely. At first, I told myself that maybe they needed time. Maybe they would come around once the reality of their absence sank in. But then, the truth surfaced, and it cut deeper than I ever imagined. Only a month later, I learned that my parents were planning the grandest wedding our family had ever seen. Not for me, not for any reason that could excuse their absence from my big day, but for my younger sister, Clara. The news spread quickly. My relatives, friends, and even neighbors whispered about how my parents had spared no expense. They booked a lavish countryside estate, dripping with chandeliers and marble halls. Clara's gown was a custom designer piece, flown in from Italy. Guests were promised fine dining, endless champagne, and even live musicians to keep the night alive. For Clara, no cost was too high. For me, not a single pound had been spared. I couldn't help but replay the bitter contrast. On my wedding day, I had worn a modest gown, surrounded only by those who truly loved me, and walked down the aisle in the absence of my own parents. Meanwhile, Clara was being treated like royalty, funded entirely by the same people who had abandoned me. When I asked my mother why they had done this, her response was cold, almost rehearsed. "Clara deserves it. She's our youngest, our jewel. You've always been strong, independent, you didn't need us." Those words echoed in my mind for nights. Independent? Was that the excuse? To strip me of the love every daughter craves from her parents? To abandon me on the most important day of my life because they thought I didn't need them? It wasn't independence they had mistaken me for, it was rejection. And that rejection burned into me, turning every tear into fire. I realized then that this wasn't just about a wedding. This was about decades of being overshadowed, ignored, and treated like I was second best. And in that moment, my heartbreak began to shift into something far more dangerous. The invitation to Clara's wedding arrived weeks later, wrapped in golden foil, thick with the scent of money. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my hands trembling, my heart heavy. A part of me wanted to rip it apart, to throw it in the fire and never look back. But another part of me, colder, sharper, told me to hold on to it. This wasn't just an invitation. It was an opportunity. I knew my parents would expect me to stay quiet, to fade into the background as I always had. They assumed I would either attend politely or decline without fuss. But they didn't know what was building inside me. My heartbreak had already transformed into anger, and now that anger was hardening into resolve. For the first time in my life, I felt no desire to please them. Instead, I wanted them to feel what I had felt: the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of being forgotten, the emptiness of standing alone. I started planning, not loudly, not with tantrums or shouting. I planned silently with patience. Every move I made was small but deliberate. I reached out to distant relatives, the ones my parents only contacted when they needed something. I spoke to them kindly, shared pieces of my story. Slowly, I planted the truth like seeds. And the truth was simple. While my parents were pouring thousands into Clara's wedding, they had abandoned their eldest daughter on hers. The whispers began to spread, and I didn't need to say much more. Relatives who had pitied me now grew quietly furious on my behalf. Some called me, their voices filled with disbelief. Others promised they would never forget what my parents had done. But revenge wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about timing. I wasn't going to confront them now. No, that would be too easy. I would wait until Clara's wedding day, the moment they thought they would shine brightest. That was when the mask would slip, and the world would finally see them for who they really were. As I folded the invitation and placed it back into its envelope, I felt a strange calm settle over me. My parents had taken everything from me: my moment, my pride, my place in the family. But what they didn't realize was that they had also given me the weapon I needed: their own hypocrisy. And I intended to use it. The morning of Clara's wedding arrived with an air of celebration that seemed to sweep across the entire village. White ribbons fluttered from lamp posts, the church bells rang in rehearsed harmony, and luxury cars rolled one after another toward the grand estate my parents had rented. It was everything I had once dreamed of for my own day, and yet I had been denied even the simplest gesture. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting a deep emerald dress I had chosen deliberately. It wasn't soft or pastel like a typical guest might wear. It was bold, striking, impossible to ignore. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to feel the weight of my presence. As I made my way into the venue, every eye seemed to turn. Some with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with quiet sympathy. The whispers I had planted over the past weeks had clearly taken root. Aunts, uncles, distant cousins, they all looked at me as though they were seeing me for the very first time. Clara floated around in her designer gown, smiling sweetly, her hand tucked into her fiancé's arm. My parents beamed beside her, greeting guests with champagne glasses in hand, soaking up the praise for the perfect wedding they had orchestrated. But beneath the surface, I could already see it: the slight tension in their smiles, the nervous flicker in their eyes. They knew the truth was beginning to leak, and they feared the dam breaking. I didn't confront them yet. Instead, I observed. Every toast, every speech, every laugh sounded hollow to me. My heart thudded like a drum, reminding me that the moment I had been waiting for was close. At dinner, a relative leaned toward me and whispered, "How could they do this to you, love? You deserved this, not her." I only smiled faintly and replied, "Tonight isn't over yet." Because I had made a silent vow. Before the night ended, everyone here would know the truth, not just in whispers, but openly. My parents thought they had written the perfect story for Clara, the golden daughter. But I was holding the final chapter, and once I revealed it, there would be no going back. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and I was ready to deliver the performance of a lifetime. The air inside the ballroom was thick with perfume, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Crystal chandeliers bathed everything in golden light, and for a moment you might have believed this was a fairy tale. But I knew better. The speeches began after dinner. First the best man, then the maid of honor. Laughter echoed, applause filled the air, and Clara glowed under the attention. My parents sat proudly at the head table, basking in the compliments as if they themselves were royalty. Finally, it was my father's turn. He stood, glass raised, his voice booming with practiced warmth. To my beautiful daughter Clara and the man who has won her heart, tonight is a night we will never forget. His words felt like a knife twisting inside me. I thought of my own wedding day, silent, empty, unsupported. Not a single penny spared for me, not a single blessing offered. I clenched my fists beneath the table, willing myself to stay calm. And then, as if on cue, the whispers began again. A cousin's hushed voice reached me from across the table. "Did you hear how much they spent on this? I thought Evelyn never got anything." Another aunt leaned in. "Yes, they sold land, emptied savings, all for Clara. But what about Evelyn's wedding?" My father's face faltered as the murmurs spread. My mother's smile stiffened. Clara glanced nervously toward me, sensing something was wrong. That was my cue. I rose slowly from my chair, every eye in the room following me. I didn't need a microphone, silence had already fallen. "I wasn't planning on speaking tonight," I began, my voice steady, though my heart pounded like thunder. "But perhaps it's time the truth was spoken aloud." A hush swept across the hall. My parents chose to deny me the chance of a real wedding. They refused to walk me down the aisle, refused to celebrate me, refused to spend even a fraction of what they poured into tonight. Everything went to Clara, every last penny. And now, here I stand, not bitter but free. Because finally, everyone knows what I've known all along. Love in this family was always conditional. Gasps erupted, and the room buzzed with shock. My parents' faces burned crimson, caught under the unforgiving light of truth. Clara looked as if the ground beneath her might crumble. And I felt powerful for the first time in my life. The silence after my words was deafening. It stretched across the hall like a storm cloud that refused to move. I could see the shock in the guests' eyes, some embarrassed, some secretly satisfied that the perfect illusion of my parents' family had finally cracked. My father tried to laugh it off, raising his glass again. "Evelyn is just emotional," he stammered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. My mother reached for my arm, whispering through clenched teeth, "Sit down before you humiliate us further." I pulled my arm away. "No," I said firmly, the word echoing in the microphone a waiter had discreetly pushed toward me. "For years, you silenced me. Tonight, you don't get to." Clara rose too, tears brimming in her eyes. "Evelyn, please, not tonight. It's my wedding, don't ruin it." I turned to her, my tone softer. "Clara, this isn't about you. You've always had everything handed to you. Tonight is about the truth they've hidden from everyone while parading as the perfect parents." The whispers turned into murmurs and soon into loud conversations. Relatives stood from their seats, shaking their heads, muttering accusations. One uncle muttered, "So it's true they abandoned Evelyn." Another relative scowled at my parents. The carefully built facade shattered in minutes. Guests began leaving their tables, their polite smiles replaced with disgust. The proud, sparkling celebration my parents had spent a fortune on was unraveling right before their eyes. I stepped away from the stage, shoulders straight, heart lighter than it had ever been. For years, I carried the burden of being the forgotten child, the daughter who didn't matter. But in one night, I handed that burden back to where it belonged on them. As I walked out of the ballroom, I didn't feel regret. I felt release. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't invisible. And while Clara's wedding continued in awkward silence, my parents sat frozen, drowning in the shame they had so desperately tried to bury. For once, it wasn't me who left empty-handed. It was them. That was my revenge. That was my freedom.